The spring social opened beneath honey-soft light that drifted over the fields of Copper Valley, casting a peace Marina Ellery thought she would remember all her life, until it became the night she most wished to forget. Lanterns swayed in the wind, the fiddle carried through the crowd, and the whole town turned in the slow circle of the first spring waltz. She stood there in the brick-red dress her mother had sewn, her heart still full of hope. Until William Harper stepped onto the wooden platform. The man she had trusted, the man she had quietly waited for, took another woman's hand and announced their engagement before the entire town. No one breathed. Only the burn of humiliation rose across Marina's face. Whispers spread faster than fire meeting dry brush. The girl's been left again. Pretty as she is, she still can't keep a man. That Miranda from the South Ranch is the one who fits him. Marina heard every word, each sharp as a thorn against bare skin. She turned quickly, desperate to escape the ring of pitying eyes. Tears fell before she could wipe them away. Her hem caught beneath her shoe as she ran toward the edge of the dance ground, where the dark closed around her as if to shield her. But one pair of eyes followed her, the eyes of a man who had arrived in Copper Valley 3 days earlier. Ethan Ward, a Long Trail cowboy, stood beside the horse pens, his hat pulled low. He had seen plenty of hurt in his life, but something in the wounded look of the girl in the red dress made him straighten, as if tugged by an unseen rope. Before he understood why he moved, he was already crossing the crowd. Marina sensed someone approaching. She braced herself, expecting another line of pity, or worse, mockery. But a large hand rested lightly on her elbow, light enough that she could have pulled away, though she didn't. "Miss Ellery," his voice was low and steady, meant to calm a spooked colt. "Let me get you out of here." She looked up. Beneath the wide brim, Ethan's gray-blue eyes held no judgment, only calm and a quiet kind of trust. I don't know you," Marina whispered, her voice breaking. "You don't need to know me to step away from all those watching eyes," he said, leaning just close enough that his breath brushed her cheek. The nearness startled her heart into a stumbling beat. He guided her through the crowd, his touch firm as reins in steady hands. Marina wasn't used to leaning on anyone, least of all a man. But tonight, something in the restraint of his touch, measured, respectful, kept her from pulling away. As they reached the edge of the dance ground, the music rose again. A gentle waltz swept over the noise. Ethan looked at her. "You let them see your tears," he said. "Now let them see you stand." The words sounded like an invitation and a challenge. Marina opened her mouth to refuse, but Ethan had already extended his hand, palm up, waiting. "Dance with me, Marina," he said, calling her by name as though he had known it all his life. "Take back what they tried to steal." A tide of feeling broke through her, anger, hurt, pride worn thin. And within it, his offer sparked a strength she thought she had lost. She placed her hand in his. The dance ground fell nearly silent as they stepped forward. The whispers rose again, but Marina no longer heard them clearly. Ethan's hand settled on her back, warm and steady. The scent of pine, sun, and saddle leather from his coat wrapped around her like a shield. And they danced. Ethan wasn't a skilled dancer, but he led with sincerity, no stumbles, no strain. Marina felt each step regain its weight, each breath fall into place. For the first time that night, she lifted her head. When the music faded, Ethan bent close, speaking for her ears alone. "This night isn't over. Let me take you home." A proposal far from proper, but Marina didn't step back. Copper Valley watched as the girl who had just been cast aside left the gathering with a stranger. Yet she felt no shame. For the first time in her life, she felt free. Ethan placed a hand at her back and guided her toward his horse. His eyes met hers in the last gold of evening, and the whole town understood that the scandal of the night had only just begun. The next morning, soft, pale sunlight settled over Copper Valley, as if nothing the night before had stirred the air. But for Marina Ellery, stepping down from the porch carried a different weight. Her heartbeat still held the faint warmth of the stranger's hand that had guided her home through the dark. Her father, Samuel Ellery, was checking the grain stores when he saw a stranger leading a horse into the yard. Marina knew at once it was Ethan Ward. He removed his hat and offered a polite nod. "Mr. Ellery," he said, in a low, rough-edged voice shaped more by wind than conversation, "I brought Marina home last night. She looked unsteady, and I couldn't let her walk alone." Her father looked up. He wasn't a man who trusted easily, nor one who softened toward unfamiliar men. Yet with one glance, Marina saw his face ease. Maybe it was Ethan's straight-backed stance, the lack of excuses. Maybe it was his clear, unwavering eyes. "You did right," Mr. Ellery said. "Thank you." Ethan nodded and was about to turn away when her father called after him. "You know ranch work?" A brief pause followed. Then Ethan answered, "I do. Worked a few places along the Prescott line. If you need a hand, I can step in." Mr. Ellery looked at Marina. She said nothing, but he must have seen something in her expression, something she herself couldn't yet name. "Fine," her father said. "Start tomorrow." Marina froze. So did Ethan. Then he offered a small, unshowy smile. "I won't let you down." From that day on, Ethan's presence became a familiar part of the Ellery ranch. In the mornings, he and Marina led the horses to water. His sleeves were rolled high, and the cool mist clung to the strands of his brown hair. Marina tried to focus on her tasks, but each time she handed him a cup of water, their fingers brushed. Light, fleeting, enough to make her chest tighten. "Careful, Miss Ellery," Ethan said, his gaze lingering a moment too long. "You're spilling." She flushed as she realized she'd tilted the bucket while staring at him. When they led the horses to the training field, their reins sometimes brushed, pulling their hands close. The smell of saddle leather and pine from his coat made her lose focus in a way she couldn't explain. In the afternoons, they rode with her father to check the north fence. Marina walked ahead with a hammer and boards. One misstep sent her sliding, and she gave a startled cry. Ethan caught her in a swift motion, as if he'd done it 100 times. His arm locked around her waist before she could fall down the slope. They stood close enough that she heard his breath. "You all right?" His voice was low and far too near. "Yes, I'm fine," she answered, but she didn't release his arm right away. They both felt it, and she stepped back quickly, heat flooding her face. Ethan only gave a quiet smile. No teasing, no boldness, just a softness that unsettled her even more. But with each passing day, the pull toward him felt more frightening than sweet. She had just been betrayed. Her heart still carried a visible crack. How could a stranger make her feel as if she were opening the door again? And as always in a small town, rumors began to spread. One afternoon, while she mended the stall ropes, she heard two cowboys whisper, "That new fellow Ward. Heard he ran from trouble in Dodge City. Killed a man, maybe? Wouldn't surprise me. A knife-straight type like him's seen blood." Marina went still. Ethan. A killer? The rumor slipped into her like the first winter wind, cold, sharp, yet not enough to turn her fully away. For in every look, every touch, every steady gesture, she sensed something wholly unlike the stories being told. Even so, Worry rose within her. Late one evening, as Marina closed the stall doors, Ethan appeared, bits of dry grass still clinging to his sleeves. "Something made you avoid me today?" he asked, his voice low but without accusation. Marina opened her mouth, then closed it again. She didn't know how to ask. She didn't know if she had the right. Ethan watched her for a long moment, as though he could see the question she hadn't spoken. "Rumors in a small town run faster than a galloping horse," he said quietly. "Most aren't true." Marina looked up, her heart pounding. "Then, what's yours?" Ethan held her gaze, steady and deep. "Another time," he said, "when you truly want to hear it." As he walked away, Marina knew one thing for certain. This man was stepping into her life, and she might no longer be able to stop him. News of the fire reached the Ellery Ranch on an early summer afternoon, just as the sun dipped low and washed the valley in a warning shade of gold. A thin column of smoke rose from the direction of the Cottonwood Ridge, where a few families lived scattered among the trees. Marina had barely noticed the plume when pounding hooves cut through the air. "Fire's spreading!" Lucas, the neighbor boy, shouted, his face pale. "The Petersons' little one is still inside." Before her father could shout for water buckets, Ethan was already in the saddle. His gaze swept briefly toward Marina, quick yet sharp enough to chill her spine, decisive, fearless, and dangerous. "Ethan!" Marina called after him, but he was gone, his horse tearing down the road toward the burning woods. By the time Marina and the ranch hands arrived, flames had raced through the dry underbrush, devouring saplings. Smoke choked the air, stinging her eyes and throat. The Petersons' cabin was swallowed in red light. Mrs. Peterson screamed, held back by neighbors, while Ethan drove himself straight through the front door like an arrow. "No!" Marina cried, but he vanished behind the thick smoke. Time dragged tight around her. A minute, then two. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst. Then Ethan burst from the doorway, a small boy clutched to his chest. His shirt was scorched, his left arm burned, his breath ragged. Hands reached to take the child, and Marina ran to him. He collapsed to one knee as soon as the boy was carried off. She dropped with him, her hand on his cheek. "Ethan! Dear God!" She had never spoken anyone's name with a voice that shook so much. He tried to smile, but his lips were cracked and dry. "Kid's fine. Just smoke." "And you?" She gripped his wrist, feeling the heat in his skin. "Let me see your arm." She pulled him beneath a tree, away from the heavy smoke. Sweat ran down her brow, but her hands didn't tremble as they touched his burned skin. His shirt had charred open, revealing the raw red of the burn. When she tore a strip from her own hem to wrap it, Ethan gave a faint, crooked smile. "You always this reckless?" "Be quiet," Marina murmured, but the words came out soft. "Let me help." They sat close, too close. His breath was hot. Hers tasted of smoke and the morning's mint tea. Each time her fingers grazed his skin, Ethan drew a quick breath, but never pulled away. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "With you here, less," he said plainly. Their eyes met. The shouting, the crackle of fire, the rush of buckets, none of it reached them. Only heartbeats, only the dry wind curling around the two of them. Marina realized she was holding his arm with both hands, and he was looking at her in a way that warmed her chest. A look without haste or claim, steady, honest, too real to turn from. "Marina," he said softly, as if her name itself were a privilege. She didn't answer. Couldn't. He lifted his injured arm, but with his other hand he reached out. His fingers brushed the line of her collarbone, where soot had darkened the fabric. a touch so light and unintentional, yet Marina felt the ground tilt beneath her. He leaned in. She looked up. Their breath bridged the last of the distance. If not for the shout behind them, their lips might have met. "Marina! Ethan! We need you!" She jerked back, her face flushed. Ethan exhaled, as if pulled from a dream. "We should get back," she stammered. "Yeah," he said, his voice lower than before. "But later, you and I need to talk." She didn't dare ask what he meant. She knew, and the mixture of anticipation and fear made her steps unsteady. As they returned to the line of men fighting the flames, Marina glanced at Ethan. He was already watching her. His eyes didn't shy away or pretend nothing had happened. There was only a promise neither had spoken. One fire had been put out, but another, more dangerous, seen by no one, was burning between them. After the fire, Copper Valley slipped back into its usual rhythm, yet for Marina and Ethan, something had shifted, not loud or obvious, but like a thin, unseen thread drawing them closer each time their eyes met across the ranch yard. That evening, after the sun dropped behind the cottonwood ridge and dusk laid a violet wash over the wooden barns, Marina found Ethan fastening the lock on the horse stall. She brought him a warm water flask and meant to leave, but he spoke first. "Does your arm still hurt?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Ethan flexed it. "Much better. You wrapped it well." Marina smiled faintly. "You take too many risks." Ethan studied her for a long moment. So long she felt the air around her still. "I'm not a reckless man," he said quietly. "I just can't stand by when someone needs help." "The child?" she asked. "No," he said, his gaze fixed on hers. "You. When you called my name, I knew I needed to make it out." Marina blinked. A small line, yet it locked tight around her chest. Ethan drew a slow breath, as if settling something important within himself. "Marina," he said, his voice low, meant only for her. "I've been thinking about staying in this town longer than planned." She could not breathe for a heartbeat. "Why?" He stepped closer. "Because of you." No hesitation, no vague suggestion, just truth, set down like a stone breaking a still pond. Marina felt torn between stepping back and holding fast. She was not easily moved, yet the way Ethan spoke stirred what she had tried to silence after being betrayed. "Ethan," she began, but he lifted a hand, touching her wrist, a gentle, asking touch. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know." Marina lowered her gaze, unable to hide the small smile rising unbidden. "I don't want you leaving too soon." The air between them changed, lighter, yet deeper. The next morning, the town posted a notice for a fundraising fair to help the families harmed by the fire. Marina read the ink-smudged lines, and her mind drifted to the waltz from that night, to Ethan's hand steady on her back. Without planning it, she found herself walking toward him at the stables. "Ethan," she called. He turned, a quiet smile already forming, as if he expected her. "What is it?" "The fair is this weekend," she said, steadying her voice though her heartbeat was clear. "I'm going. If you don't already have plans." Ethan raised a brow, waiting. "Would you want to go with me?" A brief silence followed, not awkward, but the kind held when someone is trying not to smile too broadly. "I'd like that," Ethan said, stepping half a pace closer. "A great deal." The weekend fair was livelier than usual. perhaps because the town craved hope after the fire. Lanterns lined the street, cakes filled the long tables, and fiddle music drifted across the dusty ground. Marina reached the meeting spot and found Ethan waiting beneath the eucalyptus tree. He wore a clean shirt with sleeves rolled to the elbows. Marina adjusted her collar, but Ethan reached first. "Let me," he murmured. His fingers brushed her collar into place, a small, careful touch that sent her heartbeat unsteady. Warmth spread along her skin where he had touched. "You look beautiful today," he said, his voice steady enough that she dared not meet his eyes. As they walked into the fair, a few people glanced their way. Marina knew it. Ethan knew it. But he didn't release her hand. When the waltz began, Ethan bowed his head with a gesture almost formal. "Dancing with you again is something I've hoped for these past days." Marina set her hand in his. In his arms, she felt light as wind. Each turn let her hear his heartbeat. Each breath brushed her ear. At one point their cheeks nearly touched, and he whispered, "Marina, there's something you should know." She looked up. Her brown eyes met the stormed blue of his. "Years ago," he said, "a man hunted me. He believed I killed his brother." Marina paused. "Is that the rumor in town?" Ethan nodded once. "Rumors never tell the whole truth, but that matter ended. I got word in a letter. The man died last month of illness." He slowed, holding her a little closer, close enough that she felt his breath at her lips. "Which means," he said, eyes steady on hers, "for the first time in 3 years, I am free to choose where I stay." Marina swallowed. Her heart beat so loud she feared others could hear. "And where do you want to be?" she asked, her voice thin as a thread. Ethan replied in a low tone, "If you'll have me, I want to stay here, near you." The music rose, but Marina heard only one thing. Ethan was choosing her, and that began to change everything. The morning after the fair, Marina rose earlier than usual. The Willow Valley breeze carried the scent of dew-soaked grass and the restless shift of horses in their stalls. She went to draw water from the well, trying to keep her breath steady. Yet her mind drifted back to Ethan's hand holding hers during the waltz, to the look in his eyes when he said he wanted to stay, because of her. She set the bucket on the ground, her hands still trembling slightly. From a distance came the familiar sound of hooves. Ethan rode in from the tree line, his posture straight, his expression marked with the resolve of a man who had spent the night thinking hard about something. "Morning, Marina," he said, dismounting and removing the reins, his voice low and rough with the cold. She smiled. "You're early." "There's something I need to say," Ethan replied, stepping closer. "To your father." Marina stiffened, not from fear, but from the strength of her own heartbeat. Her father, Mr. Harris, was checking the southern fence line. When Ethan approached, he barely glanced up, as if he had been expecting this for some time. "What is it, Chase?" he asked, his rough voice holding no sharpness. Ethan straightened, hat in hand, his respect unwavering. Marina stood a few paces behind, watching every move. "Mr. Harris," Ethan said, steady and clear, "I'm asking permission to court Marina, properly and openly." A morning wind lifted the corner of Marina's skirt. She held her breath. Her father lifted his chin and studied Ethan for a long moment, an assessment not meant to intimidate, but to measure the heart of the man before him. "You mean it sincerely?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Ethan answered without faltering. "I'm not asking for favors, not asking for lighter work, only for a chance to prove I'm worthy of her." Mr. Harris paused, then nodded once. I know how to read a man. Marina deserves someone who holds her heart with both hands. His gaze softened. Then, you have my permission. Marina exhaled so deeply she surprised herself. Ethan bowed his head in thanks, and in that moment, she felt her life opening into a new path, shaped not by fate, but by the choices they were making together. That afternoon, Marina walked to the creek to gather tender grass for the horses. Sunlight glimmered on the water, reflecting warm hues across her skin. Ethan found her there, hands in his pockets, his steps slow as if he feared breaking the quiet that surrounded her. "Marina," he said softly. She turned. The sun caught her dark eyes, and Ethan missed a breath. "My father agreed," she said, a small smile touching her lips. Ethan smiled, so true and unguarded, it warmed her chest. He stepped closer but left a slight space between them, a kind of silent request for permission. "Then, what are we to each other?" he asked, his voice dropping into a near whisper. Marina stepped forward until only an arm's reach separated them. "If you want it, we can begin today." He looked at her as though he doubted he'd heard correctly. "Marina, are you sure?" She nodded. "I've never been more certain." A soft breeze swept between them, carrying loose strands of her hair. Ethan lifted a hand, a simple gesture, yet it held her still, and brushed the strands behind her ear. His fingers skimmed her skin so gently, yet with enough depth to send a tremor through her whole body. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice low and earnest enough to soften her entirely. Marina did not answer with words. She only lifted her face. Ethan leaned down, his lips finding hers with slow, deliberate certainty. No rush, no claim, only the devotion of a man who had thought of this moment for days. The first kiss felt like warm water spreading from her chest to her fingertips. Ethan held her face with both hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks as if he were touching something precious. When they parted, both were breathing unevenly. "Marina," he said, his voice nearly breaking with feeling, "I want to build a future worthy of you. Not just with my hands, but with land, a place of my own." She blinked. "Land?" He nodded, wrapping his fingers around hers. "There's a small homestead for sale near the valley edge. Not big, but enough to start. I want to buy it. I want to show I'm not just a wanderer passing through your life." Marina looked at him, this strong, honest man with a heart full of intention, and understood he was placing his future into her hands. "Ethan," she whispered, tightening her grip, "I don't need you to own land. I only need you not to leave." Ethan looked at her as though her words struck something tender inside him. "I won't leave, unless you ask me to." Marina shook her head softly. "I never will." The evening wind drifted past them, carrying the scent of young grass and creek water. A promise unspoken, yet clearer than any vow, lingered in the space between them. That afternoon, rain swept in quicker than either of them expected. A thick gray blanket of cloud spilled over Willow Valley, driving cold wind across the grass. Marina and Ethan were riding back after looking over the land he hoped to buy. The first storm of the season waited for no one. It broke open in hard sheets. "There's an old cabin nearby," Ethan called over the wind. "We'll shelter there until it eases." Marina nodded, her cloak already soaked through. Ethan steadied her with an arm at her back as they dismounted, then guided her into the small cabin tucked between the pines. Inside was dark and damp, but dry enough. Ethan lit a fire with a few practiced motions. The flame rose, its glow catching Marina's face and warming her skin to a deep honey gold. "Are you cold?" he asked, his voice quiet, threaded with concern. She shook her head, but the slight tremor in her shoulders said otherwise. Ethan removed his long coat and draped it over her with a slow, careful motion, as if she were something more fragile than he dared touch. The fire cracked softly. Rain hammered the roof. The cabin felt sealed away from the world, leaving only the two of them and a thick silence waiting to break. Ethan sat beside her, though he did not touch her. She felt his warmth, the restraint in him, the tension held in those storm-gray eyes. "Marina," he said, voice dropping, "I've been holding something back for weeks." She turned toward him. "What is it?" Ethan drew a slow breath, the kind a man takes before crossing a line he cannot return from. "I love you." Not a hurried confession, not thoughtless fervor, but a truth forged from restless nights, from watching her smile, care for the horses, and carry her old wounds with quiet pride. Marina did not answer at once. Her chest tightened, as though her heart wished to open and close at the same time. Ethan looked down, uneasy. "I don't expect anything. If all I can be is a companion, or someone who watches you find happiness from a distance, I'll accept it. But if you would allow it," he lifted his gaze to hers, "I want to build my life beside you." Marina reached for his face, the first time she had ever done so. Her fingers touched the strong line of his cheek, and the thin scar near his temple she had always wondered about, but never asked. "Ethan," she whispered, "I opened my heart long ago. I was only waiting for you to speak." Something changed in his eyes. Relief, trembling, like a man stepping ashore after days at sea. He brushed a hand through her hair, tracing lightly along her neck, always slow, as though asking permission with every breath. Marina leaned into his touch. The space between them closed, not with suddenness, but with the quiet pull built through every look, every touch, every unsaid word of the past weeks. When their lips met, the storm outside faded to a distant murmur. The kiss was soft, careful, shaped by two people who had lost much and were learning to hold gently what they had found. Marina gripped his shirt. Ethan drew her closer, but never rushed. He touched her as if each breath she gave him was a gift he feared to lose. The knot in Marina's chest, the old hurt, the betrayal, loosened as Ethan rested his forehead against hers between their lingering kisses. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough, not from desire but from deep respect. Marina nodded. "I want you." The rain kept falling outside, while inside the cabin they found one another with the slow tenderness of two people learning to heal. The night was not impulse. It was a shared opening, long held back and finally allowed to breathe. When they lay beside each other, their breaths blending in the warm dark, Ethan wrapped an arm around her and held her close. "Tomorrow," he murmured, his lips against her hair. "I need to speak to your father." Marina lifted her eyes. "About what?" "About our future. About asking for your hand." Her heart beat hard, but without fear, only a steady warmth spreading through her. "I'll stand with you," she whispered. Ethan tightened his hold, a quiet promise in the dark. The morning after the storm, Willow Valley felt washed clean. The scent of wet earth, young pine, and something like quiet hope lingered in the air. Marina and Ethan rode back to the ranch just as the sun lifted over the ridge. They didn't say much, but their hands brushed now and then on the reins. Small, steady touches, enough to confirm the unspoken promise made in the cabin the night before. Her father, Mr. Harris, was checking the stalls when they arrived. He looked up, his sharp, weathered eyes taking in the sight of them, and he needed no explanation. "I reckon you two have something to tell me," he said, his voice holding a warmth he seldom let show. Ethan dismounted first, stepped forward, and held his hat in both hands. "Mr. Harris," he said firmly, "I'd like to marry Marina, if you'll allow it." Marina looked at her father, her heart already braced for the answer. He looked at her first, not to ask, but to confirm. "Is this truly what you want?" She gave a small nod, and it was enough. He breathed out, almost relieved. "Then, I give you my blessing," he said, laying a hand on her shoulder, "so long as you keep your word to each other." Marina embraced him, and he held her with the rough, steady hands of a man shaped by ranch life. Ethan stood still, a rare but honest smile easing across his sun-browned face. Their love now had shape, promise, and a spoken path ahead. Word of the engagement spread quickly through the valley. Many offered congratulations. Some were curious. Some whispered. Marina had been left once, and now she had found a better man by far. But a small fear still lingered inside her, the fear of being hurt again. Ethan seemed to sense this. He stayed near, not overstepping, but close enough that she never felt alone beneath the town's watchful eyes. One afternoon, as they worked on the north fence, Marina heard hoofbeats she recognized too well. She turned, her heart tightening. Jonas, the man who had abandoned her in front of the entire town last spring. He dismounted, his appearance nearly unchanged. Tall, travel-stained coat, cool gray eyes she once thought safe. "Marina," Jonas said, stepping forward with surprise wrapped in old confidence. "I heard the news about your engagement." She straightened, gripping the rail she held. "What do you want?" Jonas glanced at Ethan, who stood beside her like a quiet shield. "I came to speak with Marina alone." Ethan didn't move. His voice was calm, but iron lay beneath it. "If she wants that." Marina drew a breath. "Say it in front of him." A faint crease formed between Jonas's brows, but he spoke. "I was wrong, Marina. I came to ask your forgiveness, and to say I want to make things right." The words struck her like a cold wind. Her heart didn't break, because it no longer belonged anywhere near him, but the sting of being dragged back toward an old wound made her ribs tighten. Ethan watched Jonas with no anger, only a stillness that felt more dangerous. "You're too late." Jonas lifted his chin. "And you? You think you know her? I loved Marina before you ever showed up. I know how deeply she hurts." Ethan didn't flinch. "But I'm the one standing with her now." Marina stepped between them, half a pace. "Jonas," she said calmly, "you didn't love me. You regret being mocked. Don't turn me into a second choice again." Color drained from his face. "So you're really choosing him?" Marina looked toward Ethan, just a glance, and in that moment he understood everything. The cabin, the promise, the morning's blessing. "Yes," she said. "I choose him." Jonas's hands tightened, wounded pride plain in his expression. He mounted and rode off hard, dust rising behind him. Marina remained still, her breath unsteady. Ethan came to her side, not asking if she was all right, not crowding her, just standing with her, letting his quiet presence be its own kind of support. After a long moment, she placed her hand on his. "I was so afraid," she whispered. Ethan tightened his grip gently. "You don't have to be. Not while I'm breathing." She turned toward him, and the look he gave her steadied the tremor inside her. "Tomorrow," Ethan said slowly, "I'll put down the money for that land. I want you to know I'm not just a promise. I'm a man who can build a future with you." Warmth spread through her chest at his words. At dawn the next morning, while the ground was still wrapped in low fog, Ethan returned from town with a folded paper tucked in his coat. Marina was sweeping the porch when she saw him tie his horse to the post. She hadn't yet asked when he stepped forward and handed her the paper, pride and quiet relief shining in his eyes. "It's done," he said, his breath holding the chill of morning. "The land at the valley's edge, it's ours." Marina opened the paper, the red seal from the land office bright against the page. She looked up at him, her dark eyes catching the early light. "You really did it." Ethan gave a small, low smile, rare but warm, a spark in her chest each time it appeared. "I made a promise," he said quietly. "I never meant to come to you empty-handed. I wanted something we could build together." She didn't answer in words, just reached out, brushing her fingers against his. They twined briefly, simple and deep enough that both drew a careful breath. The new property sat beneath a gentle rise where birch trees rustled whenever wind slipped through. A weathered cabin leaned at the edge of the woods, its boards faded but still strong enough for a beginning. Ethan stopped his horse at the porch and helped Marina down. She could easily do it herself, yet he offered anyway, a small habit she never mentioned but held quietly in her heart. "Today," Ethan said, pushing the cabin door open, "we'll see what needs fixing." "I think," Marina answered with a faint smile, "it might be everything." He glanced around the small room, slanted roof, and sunlight spilling through gaps in the boards, and nodded. "You may be right." All morning they checked each softened plank, each cracked window frame, each stone that had shifted loose from the floor. And between tasks came the ordinary moments Marina never realized she needed. When Ethan stood on the ladder, Marina steadied it, her hand resting on his ankle, feeling his warmth through the fabric. When she passed him a hammer and their fingertips brushed, both pausing for a breath before continuing. When they stood close over the broken window frame, their eyes meeting across a small gap, breath mingling in a way that made her pulse skip. "I want to plant a small garden here," Ethan said, pointing behind the cabin to a stretch of level ground. "Carrots, potatoes, a few flowers, whatever you like. A home ought to bear the touch of the woman who lives in it." Marina tilted her head. "It belongs to both of us." Ethan held her gaze for a long moment before he nodded slowly. "Yes, to both of us." At midday, they sat on the porch sharing bread and cured meat Marina had brought. Nothing fancy, just two tired, hungry people with shoulders brushing. But in the soft gold of afternoon with the valley spread before them, Marina felt the future as something solid, no longer a fragile dream. "You know," Marina said, looking toward the distant ridge, "I never thought I'd rebuild my life piece by piece like this." Ethan was quiet a moment before he answered, "Neither did I. But if I had to start over, I'd want to do it with you." She leaned her head on his shoulder, the first time she had ever offered trust so openly. Ethan said nothing. He simply set his hand over hers, a silent promise. By late afternoon, they returned to the ranch. As Marina stepped inside, she found her father, Mr. Harris, sitting in his chair, pale and breathing hard. "Dad?" Marina rushed to him, her hand on his shoulder. "What's wrong?" He tried to smile, bracing himself on the armrest. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Just a spell. Worked too hard." But Marina saw something else in his eyes, something deeper than simple fatigue. She looked at Ethan, and he understood at once. Without a word, he fetched his coat and the wagon keys. "We're taking him to the doctor," Ethan said, calm but resolute. Her father began to protest, but Marina held his hand. "Please, Dad, Don't. He exhaled, and for the first time Marina saw him look older than his years. At the clinic, the doctor stepped out with a grave expression. Marina, your father's condition isn't simple. We'll need to watch him very closely. News of Marina's father falling ill seemed to slow the entire valley. The wind still moved through the birch trees. The creek still murmured as always. But inside the Harris cabin, every breath the old man drew became something Marina and Ethan watched with quiet fear. For days, they never left his side. Each morning, Marina prepared herbal medicine as the doctor instructed. Each afternoon, Ethan carried Mr. Harris out to the porch so he could take in a little sun. Each evening, Marina read aloud from an old book her mother once loved. But what moved Mr. Harris most was the way Ethan shouldered every heavy task around the ranch, never allowing Marina to wear herself down. One afternoon, as Marina brought a warm cloth to her father, she saw Ethan adjusting the blanket across the old man's lap. Slow, careful, with a tenderness that treated him as if a stronger touch might hurt. The look in her father's eyes made Marina stop in her tracks. No more caution, no more weighing, only the trust of an aging man who had chosen the one he hoped would hold his family when he no longer could. The difficult days stretched nearly 2 weeks. Marina grew so tired her hands sometimes trembled pouring tea. Ethan grew thinner, but he never complained. Late one night in the small kitchen, they crossed paths, Marina holding a bowl of hot water, Ethan with a warm cloth. He took the bowl from her hands. Get some rest. And you? I'll stay with him. Marina exhaled, leaning against the counter for balance. Then we'll stay together. I won't have you wearing yourself out. Ethan looked at her. This slender black woman grown pale from sleepless nights, her soft curls falling loose beside her temple. He lifted a hand to her cheek, touching lightly, as if to ask silently, "Can you bear this any longer?" She answered by leaning into his palm. A quiet moment, small but deep as a vow. People around them began to notice. Pedro arrived with a pot of soup. Old Martha from next door sent fresh bread. A few men from town stopped by asking if Ethan needed help. Slowly, the town's caution toward the wandering cowboy faded. When they saw him carrying Mr. Harris up the hill to the creek for water, sweat running down his back, but never loosening his grip, they began looking at Ethan differently. Not as a drifter, but as a man holding together a family not his by blood, but by devotion. "Ethan is a good man," Martha whispered to Marina one evening. Marina only smiled, but her heart tightened sweetly at the words. One late afternoon, as the sun sank behind the hills, Mr. Harris stirred, his breathing steadier. "Daughter," he whispered. Marina rushed to him. "Do you need water?" "No," he said softly. "I want to speak. To both of you." Ethan stepped into the doorway and stood at the foot of the bed. Mr. Harris looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "I'm an old man now, and clearly not as strong as I thought. But watching you two these past weeks, I've learned something. A family isn't built from land or bloodlines. It's forged by the way people hold one another through the hardest days." He turned to Marina. "You chose the right man." Marina began to cry while Ethan stood still, the weight of those words settling into him so deeply he could barely breathe. But the moment didn't last. A heavy knock struck the front door. Pedro burst in, pale. "Ethan, the cattle broke through the north fence. The big bull is running straight toward the Collins homestead. If no one stops it, it'll tear their garden and barns apart." Marina gasped. "But the fence was fine this morning." "A gust this afternoon knocked the old post loose," Pedro said quickly. "No one had time to get ahead of it." Ethan straightened, his face hardening like forged steel. "I'm going." Marina caught his hand. Ethan, the ridge trail is dangerous after dark. Wait for help. He laid his hand over hers, gripping gently. If I don't go, the herd will ruin everything in its path. Marina, I need to prove I can stand as a pillar. For you, for your father, for this place. Their eyes locked. A brief touch, but heavy as a new vow. I'll come back, Ethan said, quiet but sure. Always. Marina watched as he ran outside, swung onto his horse, and rode into the fading light. Minutes after he left, thunder rolled across the sky. A storm was moving in, straight along the path Ethan would have to face. The storm passed by nightfall, and Ethan returned safely, his clothes caked in mud, his shoulders scraped, his breath heavy. Marina met him on the porch, lamplight warming the rain on his face. When she set her hand to his cheek to check him, they both understood. Not every trial is a disaster. Sometimes it exists only to remind them that their love will not be shaken easily. Her father recovered slowly, though he remained weak. One morning, seeing Marina and Ethan standing together in the kitchen, Mr. Harris smiled, a rare expression after weeks of illness. Seems to me, he said softly, it's about time I hear of a wedding day. Marina turned to Ethan, and he met her gaze, his storm-gray eyes gentled to a tenderness that stung her heart. Ethan took her hand as if it were the most fragile thing he ever held. Shall we start getting ready? He asked. Marina nodded, her smile brightening the whole room. But planning a wedding was never simple, especially with barely enough money for daily life. Ethan began the calculations. Fabric for a dress, tables and chairs, a small gathering, repairing the porch on the new cabin so it could welcome a bride. Every cost showed on his face each evening as he sat at the wooden table, lamplight catching the furrow between his brows. Marina stood behind him, resting a hand on his shoulder. He looked up with a tired smile, still the smile of a man who did not retreat. I know you're worrying for me, she whispered. Ethan shook his head. I just want you to have a proper wedding, not something patched together because we're short on money. She leaned forward and touched her forehead to his. I don't need anything grand, Ethan. I just need you standing before everyone, saying you choose me. That's enough. He lifted a hand to her cheek, his thumb brushing lightly along her cheekbone, small, but full of gratitude for the woman who had learned to love him with such patience. The next challenge came from Marina's distant kin. One afternoon, her Aunt Ruth, one of the few family members with any remaining influence, arrived at the ranch. She looked Ethan up and down as though evaluating a horse before purchase. He has no background, no money, no land before knowing you, she said to Marina in the middle of the yard. Think, child, is marrying him a loss for you? Marina straightened, no longer the girl who bowed her head. The weeks tending her father, surviving storms with Ethan, building a new home, those had shaped her into someone who stood on her own ground. I don't need family status, Marina said calmly. I need a man who is decent and keeps his word. Ethan is that man. Aunt Ruth's mouth tightened. You've been left before. You should be more cautious. Marina stepped closer, her dark eyes steady. I know that pain, but I won't let an old wound decide the happiness I have now. Ethan stood beside her, silent, but the kikuma amfensung, pride in his eyes, said everything. When the aunt left, still muttering, Marina no longer felt afraid. She looked back at Ethan, and he took her hand in a firm, quiet clasp. You handled that well, he murmured. I learned from you, she said, smiling. Wedding preparations soon became part of their daily rhythm. Ethan repaired the porch of the new cabin at dawn while the fog still clung to the ground. Marina planted rows of purple flowers outside. the kind her mother once loved. They discussed the guest list with her father. They rode to town to order the cake. Each task was a small stone laid into their future. But it was during this time that Marina realized what had changed her most was not the coming wedding. It was seeing herself growing beyond the hurt she once carried. One afternoon, as she measured the sleeves of her wedding dress and saw her reflection in a small mirror, she glimpsed a different woman. Stronger, steadier, her gaze deeper, her heart wiser, and open at the right moments. Ethan entered just then. He stepped behind her, placing a gentle hand at her waist, never possessive, only steady. "You look beautiful," he whispered. Marina turned, placing her hand over his chest, over his heart. "We've gone through so much, Ethan," she said. "Nothing can break us now." Ethan leaned his forehead to hers. Nothing at all. The wedding day arrived on a windless morning. Not the harsh, early summer sun, but a soft light like a thin veil laid gently across Willow Valley. Marina woke while the world was still dim and found her father sitting by the window, his back more bent than before, yet his eyes bright in a way she had not seen for weeks. "Today you'll be another man's wife," he said, half teasing, half choked. Marina stepped to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'll still be your daughter." Mr. Harris didn't answer right away. He only tilted his head so her hand rested against his cheek a moment longer, long enough for Marina to understand he was giving her a blessing he would speak only once in his life. The white arbor stood in the patch of land behind the house, where the birch trees whispered in the wind. It was where her mother had loved to sit in the afternoons. Ethan had chosen the spot when he asked where she wanted to be married, and she had agreed without a second thought. When guests arrived, they all said the same thing. "It's beautiful and peaceful." No one commented on money or simplicity. Perhaps true calm commands respect. Ethan stood beneath the arbor in a simple charcoal vest. He was not a polished man like those from big towns, but when Marina saw him, her heart steadied, as though every painful year behind her had finally fallen away. He watched her walk toward him, not with surprise or possession, but with the look of a man who had found the other half of his life and was still learning to believe it. Her father held her hand, the grip trembling but firm enough to guide her to Ethan. Marina heard him release a slow breath before he placed her hand in Ethan's, gently, as if handing over something precious and easily broken. "Take care of her for me," he said softly, yet clear enough for Ethan to hear. "I promise," Ethan replied without hesitation. The ceremony began. No elaborate rituals, only wind, birch leaves, and the old minister's voice carrying the vows. "Ethan," the minister said, "do you vow to keep Marina beside you, in storm and in sun, in plenty and in want, in peace and in hardship, unchanged for a lifetime?" Ethan tightened his hold on Marina's hand. "I do," he said, his voice low and steady like earth after rain. "Marina," the minister turned to her, "do you vow to love Ethan with your whole heart, not comparing to the past, not fearing the future, but holding the present and walking with him to the end of life's road?" Marina looked into Ethan's eyes, saw the long days he had stood beside her, the nights he carried her father to the porch despite exhaustion, the mornings he rose early to mend a roof so she wouldn't worry. She nodded. "I do." Ethan handed her the ring, plain, without a stone, a simple band of silver he had polished by hand for many nights. Marina lifted his hand and slid the ring onto his finger, and in that moment, her heart fell still, not from fear, but from knowing she was stepping into the life where she belonged. "From this day forward," the minister concluded, "you are husband and wife. May God keep your hearts soft toward each other." When Ethan bent to kiss her, not fierce, not hurried, only held long enough to mark something sacred, the gathering went silent. Some wiped their eyes, some smiled, some turned to shake Mr. Harris's hand, as if this joy belonged to the valley as much as to the couple. The reception was held in the old barn, swept clean and dressed with wildflowers. Fiddle music rose, children ran about, grown men lifted their cups. Marina and Ethan shared their first dance, his hand resting on her back, gentle but sure, the hand of the man she had chosen. "Are you happy?" he asked as they turned toward the shadowed edge of the doorway. Marina rested her head on his shoulder. "I'm at peace, and I think peace is happiness." Ethan smiled. "I'll keep that for you all my life." Evening fell. After saying their goodbyes, Marina and Ethan prepared to leave. Her father stood at the porch, leaning on his cane, his face calm as the last light of day. "Go on," he said. "Your new home is waiting." Ethan set a hand at Marina's back, and they climbed into the wagon. The road toward their cabin lay quiet, like a whispered blessing. The sky deepened to violet, and the night wind brushed through Marina's hair. Ethan let her rest against his shoulder the whole way, an easy silence, like a second vow after the ceremony. When they arrived, a warm lamp glowed inside. Marina set her hand on the door latch and looked at Ethan. He smiled. "Welcome, home." The door opened, and they stepped into the light of the life they had just begun. 5 quiet years passed in Willow Valley. No storms, no upheaval. They slipped through their lives at a pace so gentle that only when she looked back did Marina realize how deeply everything had changed. Their ranch, once just a small plot with a crooked roof cabin, had nearly doubled in size. New fences stretched straight along the hillsides. The herd grew stronger each season, and the east barn was always filled with the sound of children's footsteps. 2 children, 2 gifts from the land. Elias, 3 years old with warm brown eyes like Marina's, had climbed onto a saddle almost as soon as he could run, and little Ruth, just beginning to say "Mama," wore Ethan's quiet smile each time he lifted her with one arm, as though she were the lightest piece of his life. Her father, Mr. Harris, lived in a small room at the back of the house. He was no longer strong enough to take the plow, but every morning he stepped out to the porch where his rocking chair faced the fields. Elias often climbed onto his lap. Ruth reached for his silver beard. Sometimes Marina watched from afar, her throat tightening, not from sorrow, but from a peace greater than anything she had dared to imagine. One late summer afternoon, Marina stood on the porch, her hand brushing the wooden rail Ethan had replaced last season. Sunlight slid through the birches and touched her dark hair with soft gold. In the distance, she saw Ethan and Elias driving the cattle home. Ethan walked ahead, tall and steady as a ridge. Elias followed, trying his best to match each step. Such a simple scene, so easily overlooked. But Marina stood still for a long time, because in these small things she saw the legacy they were building. A family shaped by kindness, a love grown through patience, a home made not from timber and nails, but from trust and steady hearts. Ethan reached the porch just as the sunset brushed the hilltops. He set his hand at her waist, light, familiar, warm in the way only a husband's touch could be. "The sky's beautiful tonight," he said, still looking at the horizon. "It is," Marina replied. "It feels like everything is right where it should be." He turned toward her, a faint smile easing across his face. "You truly think so?" "I've never been more certain." That evening, after the children slept and her father rested, Marina stepped outside alone. The moon rose full and clear, laying a silver cloth across the valley. She sat on the porch steps, arms wrapped around her knees. Slowly, memories returned. The night of the spring social, when the whole town watched her humiliation. The night she stood alone under lantern light, trembling with shame. Back then she thought she had lost everything. But in truth, that night had been the beginning of everything that led her here. Without it, she would not have walked to the edge of the yard, would not have met Ethan beneath the lanterns, would not have felt his gentle hand on her elbow, a touch deeper than 1,000 spoken words. Without that night, she would never have known what it was for a stranger to look at her without judgment. No stormy night in the cabin, no vows under the white arbor, no Elias, no Ruth, no home of their own. Marina smiled, a soft, bittersweet curve, as though she were touching an old wound and finding only new skin. Ethan stepped onto the porch and sat beside her. He didn't ask why she was alone. He simply placed his hand at her back, slow, steady, the same way he had touched her for 5 years. "You're thinking too much tonight," he murmured, his voice easing into the quiet. "Just looking back," she said. He brushed his thumb along her cheekbone, a gesture he had given her since the beginning. "You don't need to look back," Ethan said. "Everything you came through brought you here." "I know," Marina whispered, "and I'm grateful for all of it, even the hardest part." Ethan leaned in, resting his forehead against hers. Their breaths blended, quiet, soft, nameless. Below the hill, the cattle slept. Inside, their children breathed deep. Wind slipped through the birches like a lullaby only the valley knew. Marina closed her eyes and settled against Ethan's shoulder. "We've made something beautiful, haven't we?" "Yes," he whispered, his lips brushing her hair. "And we'll keep it, one day at a time." In that moment, Marina understood. The legacy of love was not in grand gestures, but in each evening breeze, each shared meal, each glance exchanged like an unspoken vow. And under the full moon of Willow Valley, with the birches whispering their quiet hymn, they sat for a long time, as though time itself wished to remember this peace. If this story brought you a little warmth, a little memory of hands that once held yours through the storms of life, I invite you to share your thoughts below. Please like, subscribe, and join me for more journeys of old Western love. Thank you for staying until the end. Wishing you a gentle, peaceful evening.